Indecision is a 2005 comic novel by the American writer Benjamin Kunkel. Kunkel was born in Colorado in 1972. He gained an arts degree from Harvard and an MA in creative writing from Columbia. In 2004, he became one of the founders of N+1 magazine, which aims to critique and contribute to US culture. He also sits on the editorial board of the New Left Review, and much of his prose, including Indecision, is informed by his socialism. Indecision won the French First Novel Prize, and my paperback version begins with numerous newspaper and magazine quotations testifying to its brilliance. Nevertheless, Kunkel himself has described it as overpraised. If that's so, and I'm not saying it is, it's worth asking why. How could a first novel by a prestigious young intellectual influencer end up being overpraised? And what might that say about literary reviewing more generally? It's a first-person account of the early adulthood in the late 1990s and beginning of the 21st century of a young American man called Dwight Will Murding, who on his own assessment suffers from chronic hesitancy. One of his friends gives him an experimental drug, which supposedly helps a person become decisive. He decides to go to Ecuador, where a woman with whom he was formerly infatuated is now living. The drug won't take effect for a while, and it might be wise to be out of the country when it does. He might do something stupid. The decision becomes a firm resolution when he loses his dead-end job at the Problem Resolution Centre of a multinational. He borrows some money from his father and sets off to discover that Natasha has now left South America, but her friend, a Belgian called Brigitte, is happy to show him around. It won't be giving too much away to say that in Ecuador he finds most of the solutions to his problems. This is a novel with a satisfying, happy ending. Its real virtue, however, lies not so much in the storyline as in Dwight Will Murding's embodiment of a certain type of young person with whom we're all familiar, whom we ourselves may even have been at one time. He isn't the most intelligent person in this book by a long way. And of course that always means, especially with a first-person point of view, that the author may struggle to say certain things that might have come more naturally to a deeper protagonist. The quality of the observational writing is what makes this book stand out. On going to see his father in chapter 7, the train pulled out of another quiet, white-painted town and recovered that slack, regular ratcheting sound of all trains. I was on my way to see Dad, play some golf and sip some scotch. And then in the end, or somewhere in the middle, at an opportune moment before it slipped past, or maybe, on the other hand, right away, the minute I saw him, first things first, and just in order to get it over with. Anyway, I was on my way to ask Dad for some money. What follows is probably one of the book's funniest chapters, but his visit to his sister's apartment in chapter 15 comes a close second. She's offered to psychoanalyze him, and Freud's talking cure is part of that. Somehow the whole process becomes mutual, and by the end it's beginning to look, even though she's the brainy one and ought to be in charge, as if she's the one having the epiphanies. Dwight, as usual, seems fairly unaffected. One major strength of this book is its gentle analysis of family relationships. Dwight thinks of himself as a rather anomalous character, and the other members of his family concur. But as always seems to be the case, the author, and obviously the reader, can see that they're all cut from exactly the same cloth, as odd as each other, albeit in different ways. Of course, what counts as normal is always culturally defined, and usually quite dull. Dwight grows as this novel progresses, and he crosses the threshold into adulthood somewhere towards the end. A few years ago, there was an attempt by literary agents and publishers, in Britain at least, to invent a new genre of commercial fiction called uplit, uplifting literature. As far as I know, it didn't take off, or at least not as spectacularly as was hoped. But Indecision was definitely the sort of thing they had in mind. If you fancy a bit of an uplift, give it a go.